everyone. This is the first episode of the Paleothomism Roundtable. Tonight we got a Narco Catholic. He's returning. And we got Bo. I got this. Hold on. Give it time. Volkov's Behemoth. Did I get that right?
Yeah, good enough. Close enough, I think.
Close enough. It's good enough. Okay. How you guys doing?
Can't complain. How are you, Caleb?
I'm doing good.
I'm doing great.
So let's get into this. What Paleothomism is going to be, as we really don't know, but this is I saw there was too many awesome Catholic libertarian right wing, kind of this whole post libertarian moment writers who are like kind of a mix of everything, and it's like there's too many of us right now to not be together under one roof. And I love the Christian Libertarian Institute. I go to a lot. They are very reformed in their theology and everything they do. And I wanted something out there for a little bit less reformed, more traditional. So I got some guys together. The name is temporary. We might go Paleothomism because we're both, that's a right wing thing. We might go Austriothomism because the Austrian libertarian thing. Don't know what we're going to call it yet, but as it stands, Paleothomism. Let's start with you, Eincast. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your libertarian intellectual origin story?
Yeah, so I guess on the libertarian end, probably really got started in right around the 2012 presidential campaign. Was sort of aware of some libertarian thought before then, but really at that point didn't have much of a home politically. Had grown up fairly conservative household, conservative, state. And then sort of got, fell into the whole Ron Paul movement, started reading, and didn't really stop. So went from Ron Paul to Lou Rockwell, von Mises, Rothbard, and then just on and on and on in that vein. And then that sort of fortuitously at the same time sort of dovetailed with starting to learn more about Thomism, starting to understand the Catholic faith a little better. And then I think, like you said, there's such a good community now that's sort of grown up. But how do we, my idea has always been how do we sort of integrate these ideas? Because I think that it's always seemed like there's such a natural unity between those, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to sort of dig into fleshing out what that will mean and what kind of content we can produce.
Absolutely. Belkov, what about you? What's your intellectual origin story?
I don't actually have a story of, like, let's say, political, noticing things politically, at least not much, because I'm not North American. I'm actually Brazilian. We don't really have a candidate like Ron Paul, or at least we didn't growing up, not that I noticed, back here in my home country. So Brazil is a very bureaucratic country. If you've ever been here, you know this. And I've always unconsciously think, well, and both my parents being young entrepreneurs, at least, well, not young nowadays, but started out very young and relatively poor. I always sort of knew how the state intervenes in them, and like, well, it probably shouldn't work this way. So I was always unconsciously a classical liberal. At one point, I remember reading John Locke, finding him sort of boring but correct when I was around 14, and eventually, because my first love was literature, I read Albert Camus. I read L'Étranger, The Stranger. Loved it and decided to read his more philosophical works. That set me in a certain trajectory of reading existentialism and then reading more political philosophy. Eventually, I sort of wanted to read more exact moral philosophy, because if you read the existentialists, there's sort of play very loose with where is the locus of ethics in man and where it is and how to derive and how to get at truths. And this was about the same time that I started enjoying more formal and symbolic logic. So I thought it was only natural. So I started reading people like Peter Geach and Henry Veitch and Murray Rothbard. Murray Rothbard, I heard of a recommendation from a friend who is an ANCAP. He sort of just recommended these people to me because I was thinking of studying economics. And eventually I got where I am today by reading those people and reading more and more. I think I only got through Ayn Rand last year, but I quite enjoyed her as well. She was very, very interesting and I quite like her exposition of virtue ethics, especially.
Yeah, no, Ayn Rand's a weird one. There's you guys know who Trent Horn is? He's a Catholic apologetic. Anybody know who he is?
That name is familiar, but I don't remember reading anything from him.
Well, I'm Catholic, but you?
No, I can't say I'm particularly familiar with him now.
Well, he's a really, really good Catholic apologist. Probably the best living debater in the Catholic area, in the Catholic school of people.
Mm-hmm.
He actually might be coming on a podcast this year, which is exciting. But he had a quote because he wrote a book called "Can a Catholic Be a Socialist?" Short answer: no. And he had a line in the book, a line about Ayn Rand. Is that Ayn Rand said, "The virtue of selflessness. You have to love yourself before you can love other people."
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus said, "Well, love thyself as you love thy neighbor, your neighbor as thyself," which means you have to love yourself before you can love your neighbor. And so, see, reads the truth as Jesus proclaimed, true reason alone. And in fact, I heard someone who was Catholic actually defend a point from Rand and say it was good. Was like, oh, this guy, he's not just a staple apologist. He's going to quote what the Catechism says and defend it regardless of what it says. He's an actual intellect. What's what I'm looking for? Intellect? No. Drawing a blank. Intellectual. There it is. But let's go to the website. I want to kind of do a little tour of how the website works, what it looks like, the team kind of thing. Say a stream. Can y'all read that? Is that clear?
Yeah,
Looks good to me. Yeah.
Okay, let me zoom in a little bit more here. Okay. Welcome to Paleothomism. Paleothomism, the intersection of three strong traditions: paleoconservatism, paleolibertarian, and scholasticism. Everyone goes there. This is granted. The website only been up for like a day, so anything on here can change. If you have any disagreements about how things are phrased, this is a group effort. So let's try to, the team here at Paleothomism. Due to the current climate and increase in cancer culture, many of us here at Paleothomism have decided to remain anonymous. Caleb Brown, founder of Paleothomism. I need a title, and I'm like, this is my idea. I'm gonna steal that. Caleb was a convert to Catholicism, coming from Pentecostal background. After reading some requirements, he knew he had to become Catholic. Along the way, he discovered Murray Rothbard became an anarchist. Though he no longer identifies as one, he respects the libertarian anarchist tradition. Eincass. You know, read yours?
Yeah, sure. So, Eincath, physicist by training, philosopher and anarchist by passion, husband and father of very soon to be two. There was some debate about whether I'd make it here today or not because my wife is due imminently. But fortunately, she's, we're holding on for a couple more days. So our second son is kind enough to wait for the podcast before he decides to show up.
What a gentleman.
Yeah.
We got if anyone wants to take a shot at pronouncing it, I'll let you take the first shot.
George, I guess. I don't know.
I'll be honest. Like, what's the? It's like the spelling bee. What's the language of origin? Can you use it in a sentence? This is just my ignorance. But what is this? Like, what language is this from?
Apparently, this is a Italian general. I think I read a little
Italian?
bit.
That's it. Wow.
Maybe not Italian. No one. Hold on. Let's click this.
Yeah, we have the internet. We can figure this out.
Yeah, we got a Substack. Let's just blah 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 blah. Popularly known as Scanberg, was one of the most successful military leaders of medieval Europe, leading an army of 10,000 Albanian soldiers about and Greeks against the invading Ottoman Empire. He said, "Okay, so it's Eastern Europe. It's European.
It's certainly Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's something."
He was born in the Principality of Castrioti, which is somewhere. It's actually, it's close to Venice. It's close to the Republic of Venice. You might actually be correct. He is indeed Italian. That is not what I would expect from a name of an Italian man.
The last name looks a little Italian, but the first one I would not have guessed that.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Gurji is a contrarian by nature who was red pilled by the 21st anniversary of JFK assassination. Converted to the Austrian School of Economics and Libertarian by Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson and Lou Rockwell, respectively. He is a confirmed student of Hans Hermann Hoppe. His political interests include property rights theory and the role of traditional ethnic culture, cultures and modern civilization. Baptized in the Nervous Order, he is a revert to pre-Vatican II Catholicism, making his spirits at home in both the Byzantine Rite and the Italo-Albanian. Again, I'm not even going to try.
I suspect the first name is Albanian then.
Yeah. He's a cool dude. I've been watching him on Twitter multiple times. He is a really fun dude. He's at his he's busy tonight, and so he might pop in, he might not, but I am looking forward to see what he brings to the table. And then last but not least, we got you take it, man.
Bulgakos Behemoth. So I'm a Catholic university student studying both economics and philosophy. I'm instinctively conservative but drawn to radical thought. I am both a Christian absurdist and a medieval anarchist, a label I am blatantly stealing from Radlib, also known as Stephen Carson on Twitter.
Nice. Link to the Twitter page for the... That's not the right Twitter page. I'm going to have to go back and fix that. I've never made a website before, so this is a brand new experience to me.
We learn as we go.
That's right.
And I will say, all credit and all errors go to Caleb for putting in the work on the website. So if you like anything, thank Caleb. If you hate anything, blame Caleb.
That's right.
Yes, indeed.
Here's the first page. The podcast, Faith, Liberty, and Praxis, the flagship podcast of Paleothomism, dedicated for book clubs, Bible studies, and philosophical conversation. And this was a link to the YouTube page. This would be a link to the Spotify. That might be backwards. I didn't test any of these things out, by the way.
We'll test them out eventually, or people will test them out and complain to us eventually.
That's right.
One or the other.
The Paleothomism Roundtable, the monthly roundtable from History of Paleothomism. So I used a lot of Notre Dame, because if you guys pay attention, if you're here recently, they are going to be rebuilding Notre Dame after the fire, and it's going to be a monstrosity. It's going to be multiple religion inclusive with a emphasis on climate change and environmentalism.
Man, I'm hoping those are just rumors, because I've been to Notre Dame once and it was so beautiful.
I hope it's just rumors, but I wouldn't be shocked. So the point of the is that there is a great history and great tradition in paleolibertarianism, scholasticism, and paleoconservatism that all is kind of being wiped away by modern conservatives, modern libertarians, and modern Catholics. And so this is a callback to a greater time, and hopefully we can do something, if only a little, to play a role and make sure it doesn't happen. Then we got Eincast Substack. This is the anarcho-Catholic newsletter by Anarchism by the Way of Aquinas. Anarcho-Catholic, link to the Substack, typewriter for the photo. And then, same thing from earlier. Oh, all the pictures linked to you guys' Twitter accounts. So if you want to, people where you go, you can use the website. And then Gertie's Substack. I hope to present in this journal ideas and thoughts regarding my personal observations of the so-called libertarian movement, something the world desperately needs more of, but particularly its fallings and weaknesses. Again, extremely valuable and rare today. The sarcasm is not lost herein. Moreover, I hope to offer what I think is a unique approach to looking at the philosophical consensus framework in terms of my own rediscovered spiritual self, and then follow him on Twitter. Bottom of this, and there's the website. So, anybody listening, right now, this is the only thing of me on the website is this podcast. It's not currently on there because we're receiving from my channel, but this podcast, once it goes down, will be moved to the Paleothomism YouTube page and will only be available on there. Until we get that subscriber count up, we're going to be doing from here probably and then uploading later today.
Perfect.
Thank you, Eric Novak. Never made a website before. Time for a Squarespace sponsorship. This one's looking pretty sleek. Thank you. Alemo, who the fuck is Eric? Eric, I don't know. Okay, but so we kind of got on the table about history. People listening to this probably know who I am, because this is my YouTube channel. So with that, I want to ask you, Belkov. You're Catholic, obviously, but was your family Catholic, or did you like revert, convert? What's the Catholic story there?
My family is Catholic, or at least what my father did leave Catholicism, unfortunately, when I think I was about 10 years old. Actually, probably before that, but officially when I was about 10. My mother is still Catholic to this day, and the rest of my family is Catholic. Unfortunately, my grandparents, both families, except my grandmother's, both died before I could meet them, but they were both Catholic as well. So I was raised in essentially like a very standard Novus Ordo Vatican II sort of deal. And I was after my father left Catholicism, I felt very lost for a while, and I was an atheist. Not really an atheist, but agnostic, I suppose. I always thought there was some metaphysical significance to Catholicism, but I wasn't sure what it was for many, many years. It was only, I think, 5 or 4 years ago that I decided to revert back. And so I'm still trying to find my spiritual footing in a lot of senses. So I'm still trying to get the readings done to know what would be the best position on this. But I'm very leaning towards pre-Vatican II Catholicism at the moment.
Yeah.
Nice. If you don't mind me jumping in a little bit, because I wanted to ask Bulgakov. So Brazil's still nominally mostly Catholic. Is that correct?
Yeah. I don't know if it's certainly mostly Christian, very, very Christian. But Catholic at this point, there are many, many Catholic churches, but it's much easier to find someone who's sort of evangelical nowadays if you just go around walking in the streets. But It is nominally mostly Catholic. Yeah, most of the people I interact with just on the streets daily are usually evangelicals. They're either evangelicals or Catholics. I don't see any. I have not met any Lutherans in Brazil. I will tell you that much, for example.
I might need to move.
Well, no, I'm very curious because there's for better or for worse, I think this sort of Latin American style Catholicism is its own sort of distinct thing in a way, because you still have you still have a like you said, a lot of people that are still nominally Catholic or evangelical, which you certainly don't see in Europe anymore, really anywhere. Maybe in the East, and it certainly looks very different in the U.S. or in North America. So I'm very curious, because I think you've got just culturally a very different approach to the faith than Caleb or I will. So I'm very curious to see what. And again, I mean, I don't know if you've been a lot of other places and gotten to see that, but I'm very curious about what Catholicism looks like culturally in a place like Brazil.
Yeah, no, because I have a lot of cousins in the United States. That's why my English is not terrible, in fact. So, and they visited some years they visited, other years we visited them. And so I have some idea of what Catholicism looks like in the United States. I have a very faint idea of it in Canada, because I've stayed there for a few months, and a very distant picture from accounts of what it is in Europe. But it certainly feels very different, because I don't know. There's a certain culture of evangelism, or a certain evangelical culture here among Christians, among even sort of Catholics in particular. I never really see sectarian infighting, or not. Well, I don't know if it would be called infighting, but fighting between different sects, between evangelicals and Catholics. I don't really see it. There's some Baptists as well, but they never really address each other, which is interesting. On Twitter, that's all I see between the American Christians, which I find sort of funny at this point, because I have a lot of Protestant followers, and every other tweet from them that I comes across my timeline is dunking on the Roman Pontiff or something like that. So a lot of love for them, but it's sort of funny to me. You don't really get that from. In fact, we're sort of from the evangelicals I talk to. There's sort of a very deep respect for the Pope. It's just that they don't really take him as they almost take him as a pontiff of sorts. But let's just say that most of the Christians in my country aren't exactly reading theology books. I'll put it like that. They go to their church, they have they do mass, they are very very faithful, but they're not exactly reading Aquinas and trying to debate the different merits of Calvinism versus Lutheranism versus Catholicism.
That's an interesting point, though. It's like, there's one thing I noticed in the Orthodox Church, because I have a lot of friends who are Orthodox. I have more friends who are Orthodox than are Catholic. It's very what's the word? Scott Hahn described it this way. It was ethnic. It's like there's Greek, there's Russian, there's Eastern. It's very ethnic instead of universal. And you would go there, and you're never gonna, because of the ethnic differences, you're never gonna fully feel attached. And Catholicism doesn't have that in the same extent, minus the split really between the Latin style and the I'm gonna say European Western and the Anglo Catholic, pretty much. Anglo was a Latin Catholic.
Funnily enough, the one time I experienced two observations actually. But one time I experienced a something approximating this in Catholicism was when I was in Canada for a few months, and my Chinese Canadian friend invited me to a church, and I was the only non-Chinese there, essentially, which was an interesting experience, but very, very pleasant. They were very warm to me. And the second thing is, I know no Orthodoxes in Brazil. I have never met one here, which is very interesting. Actually, that's probably one of the ways that our experience is different. I basically no idea what orthodoxy is from day to day. I have no personal interactions. I literally just have book learning on it. That's it.
Yes, you want to add? Oh, go ahead.
I'm curious, because I don't personally. I'm not sure if I know anyone in my vicinity that's Orthodox. Is this mostly online? Because, like you said, it seems to be very, I think, regional or ethnic. So I don't. I'm surprised that there's much of the Orthodox Church outside of those countries where they're dominant. Are these people that you know that are in these places? Or
I know most of them online, but there is an Eastern Orthodox in my not my city, but next to the city near the city where I live. I always thought it was a Jewish building, actually, because I didn't know anything. Do I find out what Eastern Orthodox was? I went to say, like, oh, that's
a synagogue.
It has the dome building, I saw the dome. I assumed it was something else. It's honestly a hilarious building because it has the Eastern Orthodox, like that dome thing, which is a cross and the three things on it, but that's just attached to a trailer. And so it's the most Florida thing I've ever seen. Good people, but I know a lot online. I have my there are a lot of people joining the Orthodox Church. I think it's a lot of people want tradition, but they don't want the baggage that comes with Catholicism. And there's something exotic about a Eastern style of religion. So you kind of get the it's exotic, like, oh, you ever been to Milan? It's that mixed with no baggage, mixed with tradition. So I'm happy people are going to something that's not Protestantism. I think that's not great, but I wish it was. I wish we could answer the baggage. I think they all answer to all the complaints about the baggage of Catholicism, but no one wants to listen to it. I mean, I get comments almost every other day about, oh, you guys are pedophiles. And it's like, I could argue for 15 days about why public schools have more pedophilia, but I'm not going to because it doesn't matter. You don't care.
I completely ignore those comments at this point. I don't think there was ever a point where I didn't ignore them, but it's just very tiring seeing them. Like, okay, next, what do you got?
Well, that's the most. Go ahead, Caleb.
I argued it more when I was Protestant and not Catholic. Because when I was Protestant and I could defend it, I wasn't defending my own church, so it actually they were open to the arguments I was making. But now that I'm part of the church, I'm part of the in group, they don't see anything outside of defending the church instead of making an argument. And so I've lost. I can't do it the way I used to.
I suspect Caleb probably has a sort of similar situation because I know we're regionally sort of close in the southeastern United States. And there's, it's probably like, it's the, they talk about the Bible Belt and that there's just, it's very Protestant down here. And you mentioned people either whenever those arguments that you're seeing online that don't apparently happen in Brazil very often, but I hear plenty of locally here. And it's so funny because I think I see this very clear connection between sort of libertarian apologetics and Catholic apologetics you could talk to 20 different people and they will give you the exact same, almost verbatim 5 things that here's what's wrong with what you think. Here's like, who's going to build the roads? Why do you worship Mary? Why? And it's just like, do some reading. Like everyone has asked this question and it's been answered 100 times. And it's always just shocking to me. Oh yeah, this is exactly the question that I've sort of been trained to answer 30 times.
Yeah, pretty much. It sort of feels like this like scholastic disputations. Like they would essentially have these arguments that sometimes would be the same arguments. So they just write them down in like a dialogue form. And this happened not only in Europe, but like, I believe like this is actually very funny. If you read the disputes between the Buddhists and the Hindus, they did exactly this. They'd essentially memorize each other's arguments and have the counter argument memorized as well. And those are a lot of the Buddhist and Hindu texts. And it's so funny.
That's interesting. That could be very fun to write a Catholic libertarian dialogue where it's just playthroughs of all the arguments of you get to hear from both sides. And it's just like, hey, here's a primer, pretty much what you're gonna hear
Mhm.
for the rest of your life if you stay with the school of thought.
Seems like it should be a Tom Woods ebook.
Come on, Tom, we're waiting. Yeah. Your friends are wrong. Period. That's just what
Your friends are wrong.
Period.
Your Lutheran friends are wrong, and here's why.
I got into some Lutherans a while ago because I said the removing marriage as a sacrament was the first domino in the devaluing of marriage and led to the devaluing of everything we have now.
Uh-huh.
And they all argued with me. It's like, well, because the marriage isn't a sacrament, and they would agree with me that it's bad that it was devalued, but they wouldn't like. They would make the argument like, no, it was right to devalue it, but it's wrong where we're at now. I'm like, you could. I explained like you could say, I think it was right to do, but also accept responsibility. You kind of kickstarted this entire sexual revolution. Like you were the first domino in everything where we are now. You're the reason that we have OnlyFans. Lucifer created OnlyFans. That's my new tweet. I'm gonna put it out right now. Actually,
Yeah, for Lutheran apologetics, we now have to contend with the accusation of online pornography being their fault. I much love to my Lutheran mutuals, by the way. I hold no ill will towards any of you.
Wouldn't. Let me put that. Wouldn't. Hold on. What?
I'll add in as well. I know, Bulgakov, you were saying that in Brazil, there's not a lot of this sort of, you don't see a lot of this sort of the same conflict or antagonism between the different faiths. But also that the evangelicals down there, there's not a lot of it's not a particularly deep faith. There's not a lot of deep reading or deep understanding. And I think that's one of the things that I do really appreciate about Protestantism in the States.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they are very active in trying to deepen their faith and trying to understand their faith and trying to develop what it is that they believe and why. And I think ultimately that's the path that leads to Catholicism if they end up going deep enough that they can admit it to themselves.
What's that Newman quote? The received in history is cease to be Protestant.
I will say that it is a very sincere faith. There is no multiplicity or hiding behind a mask on it. But it's not just for social pressure. They genuinely believe it. But you're going to believe whatever your local pastor or priest tells you, and that's sort of the way you were raised. That's how things are. Life is hard. There are other things to worry about. God will protect and God will provide. And so let me worry about this, and my priest will worry about my spiritual life for me, essentially.
I'm gonna go off on a mini rant here.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I've got Ayn Rand as my the Catholic Ayn Rand, the posthumous Ayn Rand, as I like to say. But I think one of the things that I thought was that she did really well, her critique of religion, I think, really gets at the heart of what you were just mentioning, Bulgakov, is this sort of this blind faith.
Yes.
That really is this sort of just this naked superstition in a sense, and without the deeper understanding that most Catholics don't realize that the faith has, but that is there, that you have to ground these things in reason. That I think her critique of all these other religions is spot on. She didn't appreciate the reason that's the building block of the Catholic faith, but the fact that I think she did an excellent job of sort of critiquing exactly that kind of, like you said, very very honest and legitimate faith, but one that is missing some critical aspect of our human capacity for reason.
Yeah, she had a lot of psychological penetration, which she had to be as good a writer as she was. So I quite enjoyed that about her. I've also noticed that both of our profile pictures are, or at least were, atheists during their lifetimes. So I find that funny, but just an aside there.
And, I'll probably take it a little bit too seriously, but I think it points to something about one Christian and more particularly Catholic thinking in the last century, that it's really hard to because then there's obviously a wonderful tradition of very deep intellectual thought and some good Thomists today, and there possibly necessarily, but there's such a disconnect from a lot of modern thinking that it's because society and culture and intellectual thought has sort of diverged so badly from the scholastics per se. It's very hard to get a lot of really good, deep philosophical thinking from that's grounded in that tradition that has any connection to the modern world. Because the divergence is so far back now that to really appreciate the scholastics or Thomism and to understand anything that has come philosophically or something like Austrian economics. There's plenty of good Thomists who can't even have that as part of their worldview because it's sort of after the divide, as it were.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this actually during the podcast, was the importance of economics.
Yeah, very much so. And Camus is actually one of the reasons that I converted back to Catholicism after being an apostate for a few years, because he's very friendly he's relatively friendly to the Christians compared to every other 20th century existentialist French writer, essentially, because he says, all right, yeah, okay, the Christians do make a leap of faith, but their leap of faith is a lot more plausible than the atheist leap of faith. So I prefer their writers. And so in The Myth of Sisyphus, he has a section where he sort of critiques the Christian existentialists. And then he says, don't take this to mean that I don't like them or think that they're necessarily wrong. In fact, I much prefer them over their atheist counterparts, who are far more disgusting and vehement in their own proclamations. Which I found which touched me very deeply when I was reading it as I think a 16-year-old or something.
Okay. Now, one point I want to talk about is there was a lot of great. You guys know Pinchas Aquinas is? Matt Fradd. He's a Catholic podcaster. Everybody know who he is?
Say the name again.
Matt Fradd from.
Oh,
Pinchas
yes, I do.
Aquinas.
I do. I've only watched a few, but yes, I do.
He's a pretty good podcast. I enjoy it. He's had on several people to talk about capitalism and economics because he's a conservative guy. But you bring on these people, they talk economics, and I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
You might as well be a mathematician. And it's and it's really sad because you read this, I'm reading right now, Mary Rothbard's History of Economics Swords, and you kind of read the scholastic economics. They're they knew what they were talking about in a sense. Why don't modern Thomists it wouldn't even have to be a much of a saying to just build. This is what they believed in, and we evolved to now. Oh, this school got it right too. Let's just continue there. It wouldn't be a big leap, But they are stuck in their Thomist ways, which is benefits because most new philosophy is not that great, but they don't know how to properly, I think, engage with anything after Aquinas or after the Scholastic period.
Yeah, and it's such a tragedy because that was one of the things, like I said, they sort of happened more or less in parallel in the evolution of my thought. But looking at the clarity of thought and the principled reasoning of St. Thomas in the Scholastic period, and then looking at human action, for example, or how do you develop an economics? You point it out to us back there.
Right there, human action, Aristotle, and Aquinas. Right there. That's my bookshelf. Those are the people to read.
Yeah, pretty much.
There's certainly I think, again, because they're a product of modern culture, even von Mises skips some steps, but he understands, I need to start from something axiomatic, something that I know that is, just like Aristotle, how do we know? What are the first things we know? And then, what are the first things we know about economics? What are the first things we know about human action? And then building from there. And it's such a natural, that's the only way you can really learn anything. And if you look at that economics compared to anything else that the 20th century produced, that's very equation driven and very mathematical, and we'll sort of make this thing and see if it fits the data, and just seeing this is so obviously clearly going in the direction that the school it is, with a couple 100-year gap. It's a continuation of that really good principled thinking it's shocking to me that it hasn't gained more traction.
Well, look at what people don't like reason anymore. We become an anti-reason age, which is crazy to think about. But look at Frederick Bastiat. He was a Catholic thinker who was a big fan of Thomas Aquinas, and his work was basically a proto-Austrian work. He sadly died before he could finish writing his first treatise on economics. But you read it, and it's this reads like human action. It's proto-Austrian. And it's the Aristotelian Austrian. Why do all the best schools start with A? Austrian economics, Aristotelianism. The three A's of philosophy. It was Ayn Rand, Aristotle, and Aquinas.
Just replace Ayn Rand with Austrian school. Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, Austrian.
That's another one. Do you want to take that one on cast and tweet out? Do you mind if I tweet that one out? Actually,
Go for it.
I'm gonna tweet
That
it
was
out.
pretty good.
The three philosophers were reading Aristotle, Aquinas, and all the Austrians.
Every single one, no exceptions. Even Oscar Morgenstern, you're not allowed to skip him. Which means you're going to read a very boring book on game theory. Welcome to the club.
On that point about on modern econ being this math and stuff, Thomas De Lorenzo has this great story. He was sitting like a bunch of teachers were all giving lectures to the students. He had to sit there and watch other people give lectures. And this guy got up and he had a 4 minute to represent the meat market. And the student stood up and said, "So I worked at a meat market. This doesn't represent reality." And the guy literally said, I don't care about reality. I care about my formula." And that doesn't sum up modern academics. I mean,
those are the dreaded words too when someone says, "Excuse me, I've worked in that sector." that really is like, oh damn it, God, no, please.
It really shows that the empiricists don't actually care about empirical evidence.
Yeah, but I actually think Hoppe's right about a lot of stuff, but he's especially right about the positivist sort of taking over. Well, all the Austrians are right, but I think Hoppe explains it better than most others, where it's sort of taken over the at least thinking about sciences, because even someone like Henry Veitch, who is an excellent ethicist, I'd say, I love his book A Rational Man, and his more academic work for a new ontology of morals is also excellent, and he takes account of every single modern development from the existentialists to the utilitarians.
What's that book called?
For an ontology of morals. Actually, very hard to get. It's somewhat expensive. I don't think there's new prints. I had to buy it off to like someone who had it a long time ago, but it's very, very good. And when he talks about, he was actually friends with Murray Rothbard too, personally. But when he talks about economics in his other book, Human Rights, Fact or Fancy, he sort of just says it's completely empirical. You know, it's like, no, morality is a priori, and we can sort of, with these principles, deduce things from them. But science, no, it's completely empirical, and this is, so we can't know for certain that anarchism will work out. He's read Hayek, he's read Rothbard, he knows the basic arguments for it, but he essentially completely rejects the a priorism of Austrian economics when you apply it to a science of, I guess, action in a material world where it isn't morality. There's sort of this divide that I think a lot of very good philosophers and very good thinkers just sort of have in their mind, where it's like, no, this can't be a priori. They see the need for methodological dualism between science, between different fields. The thing is, the Austrians include economics in the a priori instead of the a posteriori camp.
What's the one thing I love about I'm reading Mises' book Socialism, and I like that he doesn't call it like a philosophical inquiry or an economic inquiry. He just calls it scientific inquiry. Like he's considering what he's doing science. At the time, and in a sense, it is a true sense of science. It is, you lay it out, you investigate, you go from there. And it's fun to read someone who actually like has a view of science is not this modern empiricist nonsense.
Yeah,
I'm going to hate science, and I hate that I hate science. I hate most scientists. It's just I talk to these people. I'm like, just put the fuck up, please.
Every week or so, I see at least one take from someone I quite like saying, maybe Pol Pot was right about the intellectuals. maybe he had a point there.
I'll admit my biases. I have a pretty significant science background, and I mean, agree completely with what you're saying. But it drives me crazy because I think this is something that, at least in sort of my thinking about it, things are sort of gone wrong, which I suspect in the coming weeks and months we'll probably get into in some depth. But it really is this failure to properly understand science, because science works. Science is doing great things. Scientific minds are doing great things. We're talking in this podcast right now because someone, probably in a confused way, but in using their formulas, understood something about how electricity works, how light works, all these sorts of things, but that they've completely lost any understanding of the ground reality that creates that makes these things true. Is they write down a formula, say the formula checks out, it works, so the formula is what reality is. And it drives me absolutely crazy because you have this beautiful thing, this amazing accomplishment, especially the last several hundred years of this scientific revolution and all the incredible things that have come from it, and just the inability to Caleb called it nonsense, and that's exactly what it is. It's completely separated from sense reality, and I think it's been to the detriment of science and of culture overall.
Oh yes, very, very much so. It's a very unfortunate thing, because science really is, it's one of the greatest achievements of mankind, to be able to reason and to implement that reason in technical aspects of their life, to make their life better and to better cohabit and coexist with their fellow man. It's something incredible, and to the point where we're like, nah, I hate scientists. All my homies hate scientists. It's very sad.
I spent a week. I've been reading Suicide West by Burnham, and I'm like, I get the liberal syndrome, the liberal framework. I'm like, I'm gonna go back and watch the normies. I'm gonna watch Lex Friedman, Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris. I'm gonna watch Jordan Peterson, Ben Spiller. I spent a week watching the normies again. Everyone who exists, the radicals in the liberal framework.
Yeah, the radicals, quote unquote.
Dude, I'm reading Carlyle, and I'm like, you think Shapiro's a radical? Jesus, you don't know anything.
I remember reading Robert Filmer while I was still mostly listening to normie podcasts. That was a very interesting experience.
I bet. And it's like, one of the things, Eric Weinstein was on a podcast, and Eric Weinstein to me is a modern day Pythagoras. That's good and bad. It's like upsides and downsides of that. And his entire thing is like, it's time to leave the planet. It's time to leave. We got to go to a new planet. We've won our course here. We can't grow anymore. We got to leave. And it's like, do you know why we went our course? What's the problem? What's causing all these problems? They need us to leave. I don't know. Well, we got to leave. It's like, so you want to go somewhere new and just start over until we get right back to where we were in a couple of thousand years and then do it again. Just keep moving planets, never changing anything. And that's your solution. The liberal framework is the only framework that can work. We just gotta try to get somewhere else. It's like, what are you talking about, man? You don't want to fix it. You still try again somewhere new without changing anything. That's nonsense.
That was Brett Weinstein, you said? Who was that?
Eric Weinstein.
Eric.
Sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
Eric.
No,
Yeah,
Brett's actually his evolutionary biology stuff is actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I quite like when he's talking about biology. I'll be completely honest. He's actually very interesting. He and his wife are both very interesting.
I'm gonna get their book, the Hunter-Gatherer Guide to the 21st Century or something. It's gonna be a fun read. That's one thing. I guess actually what reason I became started going down the Catholic route is I listened to him. And I'm like, okay, evolution biology is real. Evolution must exist. It makes no sense for it not to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was told we can't be a Christian and believe in evolution. I'm like, well, that seems stupid and wrong. I mean, Catholics can do it. So I kind of found out so Catholics have I believe in niche construction evolution, which is compatible with Catholicism. And that's where I'm like, oh, so what else Catholics got right? Oh, well, who's this guy Aquinas? And it's like, oh, it's just downhill from there. We're just following the road to, Rome.
Yeah, and rehashing sort of the same point, the reason that the Catholic faith sort of allows these things is that it's okay. Well, we're gonna start with reason. There needs to be a leap of faith, but it needs to be, we're jumping from somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need so any kind of new understanding or any new good science, an actual not just an equationally based science, but a real understanding of the world. The more you know about the world, the more that you can know, and when you start having divine faith in things. And the absence of that, and again, love to all of our Protestant friends. They're wonderful people, but just that
people.
Yeah, people on both sides.
I like Protestants more than I like Catholics for the most part. I just like Catholicism more than I like Protestantism. But just that absence, or that the idea that the faith comes before the reason, as I think just leaves this. Yeah, again, you end up trying to defend positions that are quite explicitly indefensible from the standpoint of reason.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as much as I admire Augustine and love him very, very dearly, the doctrine of faith, seeking understanding, does leave a bit to be desired, which I think is, Aquinas sort of corrected that as far as I care.
Yeah. No, I have been talking to some Protestants recently who say reason is bad. We used to have the faith of a child, and we should reject reason.
That is one hell of an opening statement.
I asked him, what's your reasoning for believing that?
Exactly. So what's your logic behind thinking that we shouldn't use logic? I'm curious.
Exactly.
It's so obviously, and it leads to this and I think Caleb, I think you and I talked about this previously, but if you take it to its logical extreme, you can't get away from some kind of solipsism or this just complete irrationality.
Mhm.
You know, you have to end up denying the world directly in front of you, because okay, well, the only reason I think I know that there's a table in front of me or a computer in front of me is because I'm using my senses and using my reason. Well, okay, I need to reject those in favor of this faith that comes from somewhere.
Yeah. Also, the exact argument has been rehashed since at least Epictetus, the Stoic Greek philosopher, because he had one of his students. This is in the Enchiridion. Ask him, what's the use of reasoning? How is reasoning good? And so he said to the student, okay, try to prove reasoning is bad. And he's saying that you're gonna end up, if you can't even prove reasoning is bad without using reasoning, then you've proven that at least reasoning is useful for one thing, which is proving reasoning is bad. Let's apply that to everything else you need to think about now, essentially.
Yes. I there are very few. When I'm talking to somebody, I have like a list of saying. They say one thing on the list, I'm done talking to them. If it's we live in a simulation, I'm out. If they keep asking, well, how do you know that? I'm out. If they would say philosophy and reason is dumb, I'm out. There's like the moon is a hologram, right there. That one I'm out. I had a coworker who were walking in the woods, and he went, Caleb, you want to hear 100% true fact? I'm like, so Timmy, what you got? He goes, the moon. It's a holographic. You mean a hologram, Timmy? Yeah, that one. I'm like, I'm not doing this. You can't pay me enough to do this, boss.
So in defense of Timmy, of the statements you gave just now, that is by far the most reasonable.
That is in fact, that one is a hypothesis. It can be tested. There can be reasons for and against. But philosophy and reason sucks. It's kind of like, okay. Yeah, I guess whatever.
Okay. Think what you think, man. I don't want to talk.
You mentioned the simulation theory stuff, and Volkov, like you were saying, like these arguments go back so far, but like this, we've sort of put this nice new veneer on Descartes' confusion, and I don't know things. Like I think we kind of settled this a while ago. Why are we pretending that this is still? Because again, the arguments against these insane points are just so clear and obvious, and it takes 10 seconds of thought. Like, okay, well, what reason do you have for not using reason? The fact that idea can exist for any longer than the 10 seconds it takes to think about it is shocking to me. That they persist and reinvent themselves for hundreds and hundreds of years.
I almost admire the tenacity of the arguments. They really persevere through a lot.
Now, my hope, the reason I hate the simulation one so much, I think, is that simulations have code, they have laws, and it's like my observation on reality around us is based on, I say, laws of physics or laws of reality or natural law. Okay, now it's based on code. What I'm saying is still based on what I'm seeing around me. So what I'm saying is true for the reality we are in. That does not. I don't get it. It's saying anything.
It's even deeper than that, though, because like we were talking about with the sort of equational nature of modern science. You write down an equation and you think that's reality. Code isn't a thing. Code is a series of symbols that I understand represent something.
Yeah.
Physical laws exist. Physical laws do things. Gravity works. It's not this. You don't have a differential equation that dictates where the thing is at some time. Gravity just happens and we describe it, right? Mm-hmm. Code can't be reality. Code can only describe reality. Code can be a symbolic thing that my mind can kind of comprehend. That it's so confused about what even. I mean, it's at heart. If you're saying things like this, you don't understand what that existence is.
Yeah, no.
And it's a fundamental error. Go ahead.
The basic argument, I think, is a language can only develop if we can refer to things outside of ourselves. And coding is a language. In fact, we call different styles of coding different languages. I don't know if style is not the right word, but my vocabulary is very short today. Different styles of code or different languages. They need to have something to refer to even communicate anything meaningful. They cannot be ultimate a system of symbols which refer something to something which does not exist, not even in the imagination of anyone, cannot be ultimate reality.
Y'all, I'm having a blast.
This is great. So getting us back a little bit on track, because I'm curious about this, Caleb. I know you said you're probably among us the sort of newest to Catholicism, and I know, So in the last month or so, you got to go to your first traditional mass. I want to hear about that experience. What you thought of that? Because unfortunately, there's not one offered anywhere close to me, or that's the only thing I would ever attend. Because I have such a respect for it. But I'm really curious what you, as getting to do it this first time, what your impressions were and how you enjoyed it. With me biasing telling you that you need to like it, or I'm going to be upset. But go ahead.
No. First, let me say a screen real quick because I want to show you where I went for this first mass because it was Let me get it up here. I was on vacation in Chicago, which is why I had to go to find traditional Latin mass because it's not near my area either. Where's the images? So I went here. That's not the right screen. That's the right screen.
Wow.
Can I make that bigger? Nope. Okay, I went there.
Wow.
My first. So I went to this mega cathedral for my first mass. Oh, that's gone. Well, anyway, as you can see, beautiful building. I mean, just there was so much. Just like looking at it was beautiful. I mean, there was the floorboard, different type of wood. All of it, but there was a So I had two masses out there. I went to church twice. The first one was the traditional Latin mass, was the incense, and he faced east. There was no light, no electricity, and no mic. I could barely hear what he was saying. And I was also the first time I received on the Eucharist on the tongue instead of just
in the hand,
in the hand, which was a lot. It was a lot new. There were Gregorian chants in the background, like a choir of dudes singing in Gregorian chants. There was one thing that was I love the Latin Mass. It was one of the coolest things I've done in the last 2 years, probably. It was how it's done in all of history, and it was just the way it was for a long time. Is a really interesting experience. To kind of think, oh, this is how people hidden in caves when they were probably persecuted were talking about things. It's great. And the senses, like from sight to sound to smell, everything they played into every sense to amplify the beauty of what you were doing. And it was in the purest sense, it was a religious experience because it was every sense had something going off. And I can't describe it. It was a perfect, wonderful experience.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah, because I know one of the things that drives me crazy here, and I suspect you sort of see similar things, Caleb, is in this very Protestant areas, is there's this sort of, I mean, like we've been talking about sort of a rejection of the senses, and you and I, we were going to do a podcast on beauty at some point. That needs to happen in the future.
I'm still trying to get through the book. I am a ridiculously slow reader. I'm trying to get through St. John of Damascus, and I'm trying to get through Sexual Desire by Walter Scruton. Can I get
which is our book club.
Well, you've got it's not that you're a slow reader; it's the fact you've got like a dozen books that you're reading.
I'm up to 22. I'm up to 22 books right now.
Damn.
Anyway, but the and a lot of the Protestant churches around where I am, and for whatever reason, the Catholics here have adopted it as well to some extent. But it's this a lot more plain, bland. I know the church that I grew up in was a Catholic church, but the sort of idea was, okay, we'll use this as a rec room on weekdays kind of thing. So there's very little religious iconography, and then, it's just, you lose so much of that. And he's showing the image of the interior of that church in Chicago. Just, it seems so obvious to me that when you walk into a church, you should be awestruck every time, or that should at least be the goal. And that there's been a rejection. Go ahead.
Augustine said that the church is heaven on earth, and that when you used to try to personify what heaven would be like in the church, and it's like when you see that, it's like that beauty. Like this is the closest we can get, and the idea that the beauty is bad because beauty is like when you build something, you're worshiping yourself and your own creation, and not building it unto God. It's just nonsensical. I am building this unto God as an act of worship. I'm not building this to glorify my own self, as some Protestants would say when you look at iconography or buildings. It's so outlandishly stupid.
But like you said, you walked in, it was a religious experience. I mean, it's the mass; it should be a religious experience. But that's the fact that that's not the norm at those Catholic masses, at least in the U.S. Just it seems so clearly in error to me.
Yeah, the fact that it's a religious experience doesn't go without saying. Essentially, you have to say it to let others know. I went to mass and implicitly there is, and I had a wonderful religious experience.
Absolutely. No, I went after I became Catholic. I started going to my parents' church. And my mom wanted me to go back to her service for Mother's Day. So I went back to that service for Mother's Day after not going for like 6 months. And I walked in there and I'm like, there's not one cross. There's not one icon. There's nothing. You could not tell it was a church. There was zero way to telling it was a church. And like the only way that I asked someone, like, what is the Bible on the stage? I'm like, wait, I see an iPad. Like, well, we put one in a box and buried it underneath the pulpit. It's like, so you buried it. You took one religious icon and buried it, and you put an iPad up there. Where's the tabernacle? Oh, you moved the table of tabernacle out of the way. Once you put it in the center, oh, you put the guy. You put a guy in the center instead of Christ. Okay, I don't want to come back. I was mad. I was angry. Like, I came here for how many years? I never even saw. I wonder if there's a cross in this building.
Wow. I think I might be the most parochial out of everyone, because I'm not even sure I visited a non-Catholic church in my I visited a lot of churches, but for relatively obvious family reasons, we never. Let's just say this: but from the outside, evangelical churches, at least here, look like a place of business. Essentially, they look like. They look like traders in a temple. I'll put it like that. And there's no reason, like, if I saw a very beautiful church, I wouldn't care. If I went to Russia, I would love to visit, many Eastern Orthodox churches. They look amazing. I just haven't had the opportunity. But whenever I go to Europe, I go to old Catholic churches. Whenever I go to Italy or France or Portugal, in Brazil, I've only been. All the weddings I've been to are in Catholic churches. Whenever I go to church, it is a Catholic church. So I'm actually the most parochial out of everyone, and this is very shocking to me.
Dude, my dad jokingly said, I said, I want you guys to come with me to church on Christmas for Christ Mass. And they said, my dad jokingly said, I'm not going to go to no Antichrist church. I said, your lobby has a Starbucks in it. You literally have the Antichrist soft drink in your lobby. What are you talking about here?
Yeah, that's all very weird to me. Actually, no, sorry. I have been to one Anglican church in my entire life.
So your most Protestant church is Anglican. That's not.
Yeah, because of the school. Near the school I went to, there was I think the one Anglican church I know of in Rio. So I went there. A few times, and it was a relatively pretty church. It was right next to school grounds, so it was very okay, very nice. I had the list of everyone who donated to get it built. But it was very simple. It was very big though, so it had some majesty to it, and it was built in a more traditional style.
It's cool.
Kale, I'm curious. Do you have mega churches around where you are? Do you like the stadium stuff?
My church was my church is the biggest church in the county, and it's a Pentecostal mega church with people who run around flapping their arms trying to take off like Super Mario.
Did they do like the rock concerts or like the electric guitar? Oh my goodness!
Once, and I would say when there's an electric guitar, the pastor got up on stage. Everyone goes, "We won't be doing that again. This is a place of worship." I'm like, okay. I actually love the pastor, but he retired and his son took over. And that's actually why I left. His son gave a sermon right after Trump lost, and it was all on Romans 13. And I just read Jacques Rouleau's Christian Anarchy, so I was like my peak Christian anarchist phase. And I walked out mid-service, got on my phone, and typed in Catholic Church near Bartow, where I live. And honestly, the nearest church here, 5 minutes from where I live, St. Thomas Aquinas' Catholic Church. So it was like, this is a sign. I got to go here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, I want one more topic I want to get into before we wrap up. Because I'm not sure how long I'm going to go for. I want to read this real quick. Well, I understand. I've been to many synagogues due to my family, but also I've been to many Catholic churches and several mosques and several ski temples, but never a non-Catholic Christian temple. We got some cool people. I actually don't recognize anybody in this chat tonight. This is kind of interesting. Who brought them?
One. Love it. We're trying to do a crowd, and that's one thing I will say for the Orthodox religions. And again, I'm certainly no scholar of them, but they still have an appreciation for beauty, from what I can see. As you see any kind of the services, and it looks like a religious. It looks like you're going to a religious service. It looks like there is a deep respect for the body and for the senses and for what they're doing there. And I think Caleb, you're talking about sort of the sort of exotic attraction of Orthodoxy, and I think that's a big part of it, is that it does speak to what the Catholic Church should be trying to promote as much as possible, but that there is a physical beauty and a realizable and understandable beauty in the mass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a huge fan. My last little topic of Jacques Ellul. Sorry, that's the wrong guy. I'm a fan, but Jacques Maritain. I get my French guys confused sometimes. Jacques Maritain was a 19th century, not 19th, sorry, 20th century French philosopher. And he's not loved by a lot of Catholics because he changed his view, I think, before he died. But for a long time, he didn't believe in hell. And so he wasn't a theologian. He was a philosopher, and that's some people's problem with him. But when someone was describing him on a podcast recently, they described him as a paleothomist. I looked it up. I could not find anything on that term, paleothomism. And so I'm like, okay, so this is a new thing that we're going to call ourselves that no one has called before. And then he called this guy that. So I'm like, okay, we're in some weird company now. We're with some Jacques Maritain company. Did anyone here read any of Jacques Maritain or know anything about him?
I did not know anything about him before you mentioned him and talked about him on Twitter. I have got free approaches to God. I still have to make my way through it. But what I read about him so far, I've liked very, very much.
Yeah.
And he's another person that I'd heard a lot about and a lot of respect for, just sort of seeing people that had condensed his thought, and I've read a little bit of him. I'm curious, Gabe, is there like I don't know how much you've gone through of his so far, but is there a good place to start if someone wants to really dive into Maritain?
So I would say his best book is Degrees of Knowledge, which is just a pure book on epistemology. But it's dense. Like, two pages. There's a part of the book which is a page and a half of one site. Like he's very big on citing. A much easier book to read is Three Reformers. He goes through Lucifer, Descartes, and Rousseau, a religious reformer, a philosophical reformer, and a political reformer, and how they've all led into each other. It's a lot easier of a read. He makes some cool claims. I think it's worth reading. And the last one would be Art and Beauty or Art and Scholasticism. Basically, he wrote a scholastic breakdown of art and objective beauty, which is up our alley for when we do St. John Damascus's on Divine Images. But he wrote like 87 books.
Wow, I did not know that.
And they compiled his lectures. And they've compiled his lectures into other books. So he's had more books since he died. So it's like there's a lot to he wrote about the specialization of academics and why it's going to lead to the destruction of everything. And why it's like, yay wrong. Wrong.
A man after my own heart.
So okay, but last thing. If you could recommend two books and a philosopher people to research, who would you say if people need to go read and the books they need to read? People listening to this, Catholics who want to kind of get into the. Let me clarify this. One book for people who want to understand Catholicism, and one book for people who want to understand your politics. What books would you pick?
Ooh, that's who goes first? Actually, should I go first?
Please do, because I'm going to think of this.
I will also need to think.
Well, I have an answer. I have my answer. So if you
Kev, you go first. Yeah, you pick the question.
For my politics, I'm going to go with The Church in the Market by Tom Woods. And then for Catholicism, I'm going to say, what's it called? What We Believe by Trent Horn. He goes through every Catholic belief in a chapter, and he goes through why they believe it and some defenses of it. And it was the book I said, I want to read this book, and if I don't agree with it, or I can find things I can disagree with legitimate disagreements, I will not become Catholic. He won me over on every single issue. I was reading the chapter on contraception and covenant theology in the marriage, and I'm like, oh, I have zero arguments to get this from any angle. I cannot make one argument against this, and so I was like, this is it. I got to convert. I guess it was just a matter of like actually, leaving my church when I had Pastor Son make the Romans 13 lecture. I was like, okay, because I don't call him sermons. I call it's basically a lecture.
See, this is what happens when you start using reason. You're trying to find arguments to defeat him, and it just leads you to Catholicism. So this is the Protestants were right. If you just abandoned reason like you were supposed to, you wouldn't have any problem with not being able to make arguments.
Yep.
All right. I think I can go. I think it'd be sort of cheating to say the Summa for Catholicism. So I will not do that, but I was tempted. Instead, I'll go with, weirdly enough, Peter Geach's The Virtues, where he goes through, it's a series of lectures of his where he goes through the cardinal virtues of, I believe, courage, wisdom, temperance, and I forget the other one. But most importantly, and he begins with the 3 theological virtues, which is hope, charity, and I believe it's love, or I may be wrong.
I think
no,
you're right,
hope, love, and
yes.
faith. Hope, love, and faith. Sorry,
Yep.
or hope, charity. I think charity and love he uses in
charity's in there, but
yeah. And it's very. It's a lot more complex than it seems at first, because he makes also arguments for the plausibility of a belief in God. He doesn't make arguments for proof of God, but one of the more interesting arguments, for example, is imagine you're in a prison and someone sends you a note saying you're unjustly in prison. Someone sends you a note from the outside world saying, I can get you out. Now, you don't know who this person is, but it is rational to believe that there is someone on the outside working to release you from this prison. The obvious analogy to this is the divinely inspired word of God, the Bible. There is it is not irrational to believe so. He doesn't attempt to provide any proof for God, but he essentially says that for any human end, the 3 theological virtues are necessary, as well as the cardinal virtues. Whatever the end of humans is, because he sort of tries to prove that humans have an end, a natural end, because he is a sort of virtue ethicist and an Aristotelian, but he doesn't try to prove what end it is, because he says as long as it is an end, these virtues are necessary, and he sort of explains to them, and he sort of explains, for example, hope, why if a man does not place his hope in the communion of saints, if he places his hope in this world, he is lost. Essentially, that's one of the best chapters of the book. So that's the book for, I guess, Catholicism. That I'd recommend. For politics, I guess the most basic one in terms of, how to analyze the world would be Democracy of a God That Failed. But perhaps a better one in terms of how to intuitively analyze anything might be Michael Huemer's The Problem of Political Authority, which is a very intuitionist approach as to the problem of any type of political authority. But if you prefer an economic analysis instead of a moral, intuitive one, then I would recommend Hoppe's Democracy.
Very good list.
Democracy God That Failed, because I'd say my political views are sort of evolving at a faster rate than my Catholic ones, probably with good reason. And I've been going through a lot of Hoppe recently, so Democracy God That Failed is way up on my list as well. To try and give a little more variety, I'm trying to see what PDFs I've got open from Mises.org right now. So what am I actually going through right now? Something, but I don't know if this is necessarily the best one, but while we're on the subject of Hoppe, Short History of Man was one that I went through recently.
Excellent.
And I thought it was, and I want to try and get to talk about it some more, but there's a lot of good in there that I think sort of pointing back to let's try and build a rational, reality-based understanding of the human condition as we see it, at least economically. So I'll sort of throw in that with the general sort of Hoppe recommendation. Wouldn't call myself a Hoppean per se, but there's so much good in what he does, and I think as is sort of natural with progression from von Mises to every generation people sort of condense it down better and better. So a lot of the ideas that maybe aren't original to him, he probably expresses in a cleaner, more readable form than his predecessors did. On the Catholic end, for a single book, I'm not sure, but I would say in terms of apologetics, G.K. Chesterton is someone that I've really enjoyed, and I think is just sort of the opposite of my normal approach of this sort of reason first, just getting that sense of joy and beauty and that sort of just nice argumentative approach. I think a lot of Chesterton's apologetics are fantastic for at least just getting yourself in the right mindset to appreciate the beauty of Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. No, I started doing Chesterton's heretics. There's some lines in there that I read them. I'm like, oh, that is. He goes through. He says so much in such a little amount of time. It feels like, but when you catch a line, he says, you're like, that is good. He's great. One of my favorite apologists. Well, this has been an episode. It's been the first episode of Paleothomism. If you want to catch this episode at a later time, it will only be on my channel for a few days before it gets moved over to the Paleothomist YouTube channel, which can be found on the website at paleothomism.com. Link will be in the description, along with a link to the Twitter. Make sure you go and subscribe to Ironcast Substack. Make sure you follow all of us on Twitter. Guys, give you plugs real quick if you would.
So I'll go ahead.
Mhm.
At Eincath on Twitter and anarchocatholic.substack.com. Trying to post more regularly, especially as we get this website up and going. But a lot of what we've been talking about today, and a lot of more sort of current event issues. So everything sort of in that in the vein of where our interests lie.
Nice.
All right. I don't really have a much of a plug. I have a Twitter account. It's called @available username. The username missing a E because apparently that one was taken. I think when I established it years ago. I don't really have a direction of my posting. I just sort of either comment or retweet things I find interesting. I might have a direction it heads in soon, or maybe not. I'll decide in the coming weeks.
Sounds good. Well, guys, it's been a lot of fun. Everyone listening, go read more books. Join the Catholic Church.